It helped them lose the fear of death. And he did experiments with people who were diagnosed with terminal illnesses. I think it was old people. And what happened is they found out that a good, I think definitely it was 70%, the psychedelics helped them come to terms with what was happening to them. And the most impressive thing, literally from one single session, most of them had this incredible change in their perspective in their life. And that sort of opened the Pandora's box for the psychedelic renaissance that we're seeing now.
Hello and welcome to the Knowness podcast, the vault of knowledge. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Knowness podcast. I'll be joined by some familiar faces. We have our co-host, Ethan Willett, the medicine subject lead, as well as the chief learning officer, Musa. We'll be discussing psychedelics and having a deep dive into mental health, its potential treatments, and the future of both. So thank you and join us for this week's episode. So, as I said, we have two familiar faces today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Musa. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Knowness. I also have a background in chemistry, and I'm looking at doing a PhD in neuroscience.
Fantastic. And how about yourself?
I'm Ethan. I'm the medicine subject lead at Knowness, and I'm a medical student.
Fantastic. Now we have two unique guests, and unique in the sense of they've been on both sides of the couch. So,
It's true indeed.
Musa, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about psychedelics. Mm-hmm. Definitely not because we're out of podcast guests.
We're not trying to fill a 5 p.m. slot on April 17th.
Because we had to fill in.
Yeah, definitely not. Anyway, so...
And not because psychedelics had high virality in our data.
Because virality is newer.
But yeah, we're talking about psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. So when I hear the word psychedelics, what I think of is 80s, kind of like LSD.
More like 60s.
60s, LSD, MDMA, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Bright colors, vibrant. That's just my external perspective. Mm-hmm. As someone who's not very educated on the topic yet. But by the end of this podcast, I hopefully will be. So, what's your perspective on it?
Well, I think my perspective on it, I think we probably should start with a better question, which would be, what are psychedelics?
You can ask yourself your own questions. Yeah, let's just do that. So, we'll be the audience and you can ask yourself questions.
Describing what psychedelics
what
are.
What is psychedelics, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anytime.
Describing what psychedelics are, there's actually 3 different types of psychedelics. Mm-hmm. There are the classical psychedelics, which is what most people are familiar with.
There's can you give examples?
I will in a minute. There's the dissociative psychedelics. The dissociative psychedelics.
Yes.
I'm not going to repeat again, so hopefully you remember. And then we have the ones that I'm personally the most interested in. They're the deliriant psychedelics.
Can you say that word again?
Deliriant.
I like how he says it.
Okay. So the classical psychedelics are what you guys have probably, most of the audience will have heard about. These are your mushrooms, so that's psilocybin. The psychoactive psychedelic compound in mushrooms. You have your LSD, acid. There's a lot of names for drugs. There's also the whole 2C class of psychedelics. There's a lot of classical psychedelics. We can go into their pharmacology in a bit. Excuse me.
I excuse you. You're refreshing.
There's also the dissociatives. I think the most famous dissociative that people might have heard of is the famously called the horse tranquilizer. This is ketamine.
Oh, yes.
The other one that's quite famous in the States specifically is PCP, which has the coolest drug name I've ever heard. It's actually Angel Dust or Ivory Wave as well. It's a cool name for a drug. And finally, deliriums. Now, deliriums aren't really taken recreationally, or they're like a really strange class of drugs. The most commonly taken delirium by people who do end up taking them it's actually this like cough medicine that people have. Not the cough medicine, not DMX that people think. It's an Benadryl. So it's like
Benadryl.
the common anti-allergen, I think it is, often given to kids. Antihistamine, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Is that the same thing as an anti-allergen for allergies?
Usually.
Yeah, okay, that's what I meant. So it's usually...
I guess you really messed up though, like Benadryl.
Well, you have to take I think
a lot of pills.
30 pills, and then it becomes like a really strong deliriant. But people do that, and it's
delirious.
not that dangerous.
Really?
If you just do it once. I know so often. But just saying, this is...
we don't
I feel like we need to have a disclaimer. Don't do drugs, kids. Don't do anything like this.
Don't do drugs unless your doctor prescribes it.
Yeah.
Might be one of us one day, but...
But that's deliriants, and they have slightly different effects. Mm-hmm. Psychedelics in general, we don't really know how they fully work. So the classical psychedelics, again, these are the more famous one that people are familiar with. They essentially work on these serotonin receptors on your brain. LSD works essentially, it binds to your serotonin receptors. And where it does, it just binds and does not move. So it's actually activating your serotonin receptors, which is typically where serotonin is often, when it comes to its emotional effects to the mood, the person's mood, it's essentially associated with some type of, like, for example, euphoric effects, like positive, feel-good effects. I don't want to give anything more specific than that. And what your brain does essentially is, because it stays bind to the receptors for so long, your brain starts absorbing the actual receptors into the cell to try and like clear the receptor. And the process of doing that seems to be what triggers the psychedelic state of mind. Now, we don't really know much else after that. The other thing that we can say for certain is, some people might be familiar with this. We've seen MRI scans of people's brains under the influence of psychedelics. And you guys might be familiar with this. We mentioned this in your podcast. We have the prefrontal cortex, often described likes to work a bit like a director of the brain. So it like essentially regulates. So we constantly take in stimulus, and most of what our brain does, we have all our senses, we take stimulus, and essentially our brain, it's like the stimulus is the input, our brain processes the stimulus, and then our actions, our behavior is the output. That's a very simple way, but also I would say a pretty accurate way to describe what the human nervous system is really doing. So the prefrontal cortex is right here at the front. And what it does essentially, it essentially decides, okay, I'm getting all these stimulus, which ones are more important, which ones should I focus on, which ones I need right now. For example, you might be doing something and you hear a loud bang. That's your prefrontal cortex making you go, oh, you need to pay attention to where the loud bang came from. That's the part that decides all this, like where your focus or attention should be at. So when you do MRI scans of people on psychedelics, you see the prefrontal cortex is completely asleep. Not completely asleep, but very low activation, essentially. And that causes the rest of your brain to go into hyperactivation. So that's essentially what I would say that's the pharmacology that we know of. Okay. And that's what sort of the cognitive neuroscience that we know so far.
Do you mind if I just try and summarize that back for you? Okay. Do you mind if I just try and like summarize that back to you to make sure I understood
it's not patronizing? Yeah, okay.
So, I'll patronize you. Well, correct me if I'm wrong.
I will.
So we've covered the three classes of psychedelics. You've just described how classical psychedelics work.
Yeah.
And you described them mainly in terms of serotonin. And also and also the prefrontal cortex. You said in the way that acts on serotonin, it binds to the serotonin receptors.
And LSD specifically.
Yeah, LSD specifically.
But the other ones also work on serotonin.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they all work on serotonin receptors. LSD
so if we specifically, I really want us to have like a screen so I could show you the molecule. I could show you.
Hey, Jamie, pull that up.
Jamie, pull that up. So if I could show you the structure of the serotonin molecule, and it's a very simple structure and very similar to other chemicals found in nature for very important reasons.
Can you like kind of draw it down with your hand?
It's like, I'm not going to do it now, but I could draw it down.
Yeah.
And then you can put down all the other classical psychedelics next to it. So you can have your LSD, your psilocin, because psilocybin actually becomes psilocin in your brain, and then it activates you.
Yep.
You have your DMT, your NN-DMT, your 5-MeO DMT. I mean, even psilocin is DMT technically. You have 4-hydroxy-AMPs. All these psychedelics, all the 2C series of psychedelics, they're essentially just slightly different variations of the serotonin molecule. But yeah, carry on. Sorry.
So so they all work on serotonin, but acid specifically are LSD.
LSD. Sound like a nitty saying.
So LSD specifically, this binds to the serotonin receptors for such a long time that the cell reacts by bringing these receptors in.
Yeah, we're drawing cells in. That's one of the mechanisms.
So they're not available on the outside of the cell for molecules such as serotonin to bind to. And there's something to do with this action of it being absorbed into the cell leads to the psychoactive effects.
Yeah.
Secondary to that, we've got our prefrontal lobe, which is usually our kind of like,
cortex,
mission control of the brain.
The directive. Mission control's accurate, Captain
Floyd.
Stops being so active. So the rest of the rest of the brain
Dark side of the
starts, the boss is out of the office.
Indeed. Yeah. And everyone else just goes crazy.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, is that Benadryl as well? Is that specifically just
Benadryl?
Yeah.
When it comes,
we have no
I think
idea.
this is the classical.
Specifically just
the
the classics.
delirium.
Okay.
So again, these are two. I mean, like, okay, what is the serotonin stuff and the prefrontal? Like, how do they link together? We don't know.
So there's still a lot that we don't
These
understand.
are two observations that I can tell you that the most well documented that we know of. There's other things as well that we know now, but I feel like we should just leave it at that for sake of accuracy. But yeah, you guys can ask me questions.
So
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about our classical psychedelics, our dissociative, and
we've mentioned the dissociative.
Yeah,
we can talk more about
and
them.
what the delirium ones.
The deliriums, which I think the most interesting.
Deliriums sound the most interesting.
Do we know about the mechanisms of the others?
We know some stuff. I personally don't know that much about them,
Okay.
but I know some stuff. But I don't think we know enough that we should, especially because we're more interested on the psychological aspects of them.
Well, why is there not much known about it, especially with LSD? Is it lack of research or is it just?
Well, I mean, you already know the answer to this to some extent. I mean, but the audience knows they are illegal to study.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Well, not anymore, but they were for a long time.
Okay, what's changed?
Okay, so psychedelics were really big, especially in the 60s. So there was
early on. Yeah.
There was the whole Vietnam War happening around that time, and that sort of led to even before that, to the anti-war movement, to the hippie movement, really. And much of the hippie movement was actually it was about a lot to do with psychedelics. It was a lot to do. Psychedelics became a big part of the culture. The hippie movement. Now, why does psychedelics leads to or is connected to an anti-war movement is a whole other way we can go. This is also the time that Native American people started using psychedelics in their cultural traditions as well, which is another interesting observation.
This wasn't.
So this is not like Amazonian people. This is North Native American people using peyote.
And this is
in the 60s.
From the 60s.
This is not like 100-year ages old. This is like a recent
more of a
thing,
modern,
which is very interesting, but that's a separate thing.
Yeah.
So there was the anti-war movement happening, and huge part of this new culture, ethos, religion of this hippie, new, very anti-war thing was founded on psychedelics. And that's what I'm talking about, the Native American, because that's also religion that's also now became founded on psychedelics, sort of, or at least revolves around it. I don't think psychedelics.
I wouldn't say founded.
Yeah, I wouldn't say founded again. I would say more, it's an important part of it, but it's not really necessarily the most important part of it.
I see.
And, there were certain people that wanted to stop the anti-war movement, and big part of it was all these drugs and stuff. And they knew the Catholic Church has done the same thing with psychedelics in the past. So they outright banned all psychedelics with no evidence, really. They're criminalized to be worse than many other drugs as well.
You're saying that the anti-war movement, so the anti-hippie movement.
The government,
let's say,
the
government.
CIA.
Did you just said then quite briefly that they emulated the Catholic Church?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Well, we can go further back, but let's just finish this line of thinking. So that's one of the reasons they banned. But I mean, there was a lot of other things going on in the 60s. The government themselves were experimenting with the psychedelics as well. So there was the whole MK Ultra CIA stuff going on.
So the bulk of the research we have, is it from that time period?
So we had some research in that period, and then as soon as they banned everything,
they just stopped.
MK Ultra, I don't know what happened with MK Ultra. We don't really know, but I can tell you more about MK Ultra. But it stopped from the 60s, and it was demonized, and the word LSD becomes synonymous with methamphetamine and heroin and
cocaine,
some of the worst drugs. Mushrooms, crazy people go crazy, whatever makes people kill themselves. You have like flashbacks years later, completely things that are not true at all in any way, but that's what happens. And it kind of died out. Then there is this brilliant psychology researcher, one of the most highly peer-reviewed, esteemed psychologists of our time, who has now passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago. I'm forgetting his name. If I had more time to prepare for this podcast, I'll have remembered it. Yeah. But in the early 2010s, so like 10 years ago, if not less. 2010s.
Oh, 2010s.
2010s. All right, good. We know I'm not, very good at maths, as we found out by the other podcast. Anyway,
shout out the maths podcast, available on Knowness.
No, I'm kidding.
psychedelics.com.
So we know in the early 2010s, he was a really well, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. I feel really bad. He worked at Johns Hopkins University, which has probably the best medical school in the world, at least research-wise. The best medical school. He worked there. And this goes on how highly esteemed of a psychologist he is. He actually got permission to work with psychedelics for the first time in long time. Someone in not part of the government could actually work on psychedelics. And he did experiments with people who were diagnosed with terminal illnesses. I think it was old people. It wasn't younger people. And it was a psychologist, and they wanted to see the effect of psychedelics. I don't know where he got the idea from, actually, or at all. I'm very interested. I don't know where he came with the idea from. And what happened is they found out that a good, I don't want to misquote this, but I think it was definitely over 60%. I think definitely over 70% of them, the psychedelics helped them, as the paper describes. I mean, I don't want to sound like this is something I'm being hyperbolic. This is what the paper said. It helped them lose the fear of death. And they helped them come to terms with what was happening to them. And the most impressive thing, because you're trying to compare them to other drugs and pharmacology or others, literally from one single session, most of them had this incredible change in their perspective in their life. And that sort of opened the Pandora's box for the psychedelic renaissance that we're seeing now. Yeah.
So you might have seen from the last podcast, I'm very interested.
I was there.
And yes.
I was also there.
You might have seen from the last podcast.
If you haven't, pause the video. Go watch it. This is important context.
That I'm really interested in palliative care.
Yeah.
What's that?
So palliative care is
watch the podcast to find out.
The specialism of medicine, where you stop focusing on curative treatment and you start focusing more on symptom-based treatment, which is almost entirely in dying people, not all the time, but almost entirely in dying people. And in terms of the drugs used for palliative care, the drugs used are for, you view it on symptom-based. So if I'm treating a chest infection, I will use antibiotics, but in palliative care, instead of considering chest infection so much, you still would treat it. But instead of focusing on that, I might focus on more, this person is in pain or this person is breathless. It's really interesting hearing you say that, is we can almost view the fear of death as a symptom.
Yeah,
which is bizarre. It's abstract.
The idea behind it is very unique.
I mean, if and actually a lot of, I don't. There's a lot about the medicalization of medicine and giving everything names and pathologizing it, which has its downsides. But if we were to kind of don our medicine glasses, then we could
I don't
view
wear
this.
Glasses. So know.
We could view this as like it's the fear of death as a symptom, and from what you're saying, psychedelics as a drug to treat it.
I guess that kind of borders into the philosophy of kind of life and death and all that kind of stuff. It's very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
Yeah, it's very abstract as well. The idea, initially abstract. I think once you get into it and start to discuss it, and once it becomes a lot more normalized, the idea of death being a symptom, I feel like a lot of progress can be made there.
The fear of death being a symptom.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Or even a condition. I mean, at this point, because you have to have, in medicine, you have to have a structure in your mind, because there's so much information out there, and you have to put things into categories to be able to function. But fundamentally, it doesn't really matter if we call the fear of death a symptom or a condition or anything like that. I think the end of the day, if we're taking a pragmatic approach, which you hear is kind of a buzzword in medicine quite a lot, which is doing what works, essentially, what's realistic.
Yeah.
If we're taking a pragmatic approach, then people are suffering from fear of death, and this seems to be an effective treatment.
Yeah.
For it.
So
I would say one thing to that is like, when it comes to things about the fear of death and people's emotion and stuff, I feel like a lot of people, this is one of the reasons I'm really interested in neuroscience, is because I believe all these things can be viewed as symptoms, like having fever or something else.
Yeah.
Like, I think people do have this thing that there is something about human emotion or mood that is just an ethereal part of the human experience. Yeah. That is just this thing that is just like unmutable, like mystical thing that cannot be studied, and it's completely different for everyone. And there's no way that we can just like find like a pragmatic step-by-step way of approaching it and tackling it and finding a solution for people suffering from that kind of like bad mental state.
I think there's I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think there's a good reason why that's kind of the dominant kind of view, the kind of like way of thinking about the subject, because for a long time anxiety was an imbalance of a certain neurotransmitter, you know, like a certain chemical messenger in your brain. Anxiety was another imbalance, you know, like all of these conditions was just an imbalance of a single neurotransmitter or something like that, and we could just fix it with a drug. And then you kind of get this more abstract, this like less easily measurable therapy. You get psychoanalysis, like with Freud.
Shout out Freud.
Yeah.
Shout out Freud.
Yeah. Some people don't like Freud very much.
I know your parents don't like Freud.
My parents are psychologists. They do not like Freud.
I like Freud.
But you get psychoanalysis coming from Freud. And you get all this CBT and stuff. And although CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is kind of the leading form of therapy right now, although that's kind of much, it's less kind of mystic as psychoanalysis. Even then, we have this whole running theme through all of that, which is moving away from our, it's an imbalance of a neurotransmitter. You got too little dopamine or something like that, and it's moving towards, what's your life story? How have you suffered?
Yeah.
You know, and it's going into the beliefs that people have. Instead of saying you got too little dopamine, you're saying actually you were raised in a way to believe that you are worthless, that you are not deserving of love.
Yeah, there was a story about this. So there's a guy, there was a patient, right? This patient came into the clinic one day complaining of like body fatigue and chronic fatigue and all these problems. And the GP ran every single test. So the doctor ran every single test. They couldn't find out what was wrong with him. So he went hospital to hospital, doctor to doctor. This was in the States. They just couldn't find out what was wrong with this person. And so one day he spoke to one doctor, and the doctor sat down and just asked him, you know, what's been going on? How have the past few months been for you? And this elderly patient just said, you know, my wife passed away and it's been horrible. And just from that simple question of asking how he was, he found out all these problems he was having about, it turned out he was just confused about the passing of his wife and how to deal with it and to deal with the loss of someone. And from that point onwards, they were able to, you know, he was able to get much better, and they were able to get grief counseling and all those things. But the story, the moral behind that story is that a lot of medicine nowadays is become, like you said, just finding out a problem and dumbing it down into just science. So you've got problem neurotransmitters, we'll use this drug to fix it, and that's it. When in reality, it's a lot more complicated than that. It's a lot more deeper than that.
Yeah, but
and it removes that human element.
Which is why
I disagree. Hold on. It's like you're not dumbing it down to what you really mean. You're reducing it into science.
Yeah. So
I still think the human element itself still comes into science. It's just science we don't understand yet.
How are they?
Well, if you frame it that way, then
that's what really is the thing.
Yeah.
But historically, a lot of the time,
well, if you want to go historically, how mental health was seen in treatments was seen as possession and spirits, demonic spirits. And we actually learned this in
it's a balance of both of that human element and also science. I guess from your perspective, you view the human element as under that. I mean,
it is, but it is a science, and that is the important thing. It 100% is a science.
What do you mean by it's a science, though?
I mean, it is that the human speech, and this is my whole point when I brought this up. Human speech, thought, I guess under thinking, the big umbrella feeling, of science and emotion is all governed by the same rules of science. And the thing is, it's just really complicated, so we can't approach it from it's not as simple as just one neurotransmitter.
I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. It's instead of viewing it as like that textbook approach of it's more so.
But I think this whole other view of also like, I think it's a healthier view. Yeah. The view of it's about understanding the person's history. It's about talking to them.
It's the empathy.
I think that's 100%.
I think it's about balancing both those things.
It's really important, but I feel like that is coming to the expense that it is bringing this new idea, which is like now it's this talking to people and emotions it's like this irrational, this more emotional area, social area. It's not something you can actually observe with instruments, but I think we can still observe them. It's just really complicated. And we do want to move to a place where I can understand all the genetic cascades, all the metabolism, every single neuron, how it fires, all the thing. And I can understand your family history. I can do your genome. I can analyze your genome. And then I can literally have you sit down and do like a long psychoanalysis session. So I know all your family history and everything. And then put that all together to synthesize like some sort of solution for whatever your mental problem is. That's not exactly, I don't know. I feel like that kind of.
So what I'm hearing is, I've I kind of posed to you the question before of, I was essentially asking you, how are you different? How are you different from these people who...
How am I different? I'm normal human.
No. How are you different from... You're kind of proposing this very scientific approach to mental health. And what I was wondering is how are you different from these people before who arguably unsuccessfully tried to kind of fix mental health by thinking there's too much dopamine, there's too little dopamine, really simplified forms. We've now moved to a more kind of therapy-based approach.
Yeah, it's like although we do also have more therapy.
Although we do also have pharmacology and kind of science behind it, it is therapy dominant. What I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing is you want to move to a third phase where science plays a heavier role. I'm not liking the way that I'm using the word science, but for lack of a better word here. Science plays a heavier role.
A materialistic point of view, essentially.
Okay,
more materialistic.
Yeah.
Less sort of...
How do you avoid the treatment of mental health being overly simplistic and like the view of neurotransmitters was?
Well, how would you balance that out?
There's a couple of things I could say. First of all, okay, how am I different from like people who are neurotransmitters? I mean, I don't know. I'm sort of pushing for a more nuance for not being. It's like, no, my whole point is that it is very complicated. Okay. So you wouldn't really simplifying it. That's sort of saying is like, I don't know, like the four humans theory was scientific, even though it was incorrect.
Yeah, but
it was still a scientific approach. It's like how four humans, like blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile.
This is like old,
old medicine. That is still scientific.
Like Hippocrates kind of. This is historic ancient Greece kind of.
So it's like that's all. But that was like some of the first actual scientific.
You said Hippocratic,
Hippocratic,
That's the same.
It's the same guy. It's the same guy. From the Hippocratic Oath, it's the same guy.
Yeah, from Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
He's in there. He's in there as well.
He's in there. Shout out that guy.
But that was scientific, and it's sort of like saying, okay, how are you different from that because you're also having a scientific approach to whatever you're doing. So I don't really think I don't. But okay. So the idea is that I don't know what your question was. Actually, I completely forgot.
So essentially,
I think I remember now. It's like
just trying to understand your perspective a bit more.
It's accepting one. It's obviously acceptance that it's very complicated and you can't like reduce it to one simple thing like that because we tried it and it didn't work in the past. But that should be the case for anything in science, anyways. It's accepting that you will never know everything and there's always more to know. And the second thing and the most important thing is actually getting results that you want. Like that's the only reason we left the previous thing is that. If you can't show me that you can actually improve a person's mental health, not by some, this chemical is now lower, good to go, that they genuinely are actually for every way you can describe them, what they report, every metric
everything
are
about
better,
them. The test
then your science is not working. So it's literally by the way we do anything in engineering is by results. The way you figure out a car, you made a faster car, is to measure, is it actually going faster?
So, okay, the question I'll ask now is related to that. Okay, so fine. So what you're saying is we use science and again, oversimplification, but to say quote science, to find out everything. So in terms of the best treatment for the patient, the best screening to use for the patient, the best therapeutic techniques for the patient, but based on science and research, right? But how do you...
But the thing is, there's a lot of science and research that is yet to done.
Exactly, yeah,
and wait, and where we are now at a point where we're opening a new chapter in science.
Yeah.
I don't want to say the word AI because it's cringe.
Yeah.
And AI is not exactly what I'm going for. It's adjacent, but essentially the study of complexity and the study of neuroscience. Neuroscience is now at front, where we are now able to understand the brain in a more integrative, more heavily detailed approach. This is actually shown by AlphaFold 2. That was like a protein folding problem. And the way we're able to now solve incredibly complicated problems, like how the human brain works at like a molecular level, that shows that we are moving to a place where we are able to maybe integrate the whole brain and actually understand it at a much deeper level. That whole one single hormone imbalance thing is like the four humans theory level of simplicity.
It's a lot more complex than that.
Compared to what we're moving on to.
I completely agree with everything you're saying, but the one thing I might disagree with you with is all of that is great, but that doesn't necessarily teach you, and we spoke a bit about healthcare communication, how you actually talk to these patients, because that plays a large role in their...
I mean, yeah, but therapy. I'm not trying to... That has nothing to do with what I was arguing.
No, but do you think that's a big part of their treatment?
Yeah, I'm sure it is. So, I never said it wasn't.
No, exactly. But this is why I mentioned how
so what do you disagree with me, as you said?
Say again?
You said you disagree with me.
Hey, maybe.
I think we need some moderation here. Tensions are rising in the world.
This is a debate. No, but because I said earlier, you need to have the communication and the empathy side of things.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah,
and the 100%. Scientific side as well.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so we don't really disagree.
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, learn to listen.
Would you agree with this?
I don't know.
Would you agree with this summary? So we've gone from our kind of too little dopamine as being the cause of depression, which
I wouldn't even bring that into the conversation. But yeah, carry on. That's how we crap that.
No.
Yeah,
I'm drawing a timeline here. So we've gone from that, which is we're drawing parallels to the four humors, which is very kind of oversimplified science. Although we haven't departed from neurotransmitters, I mean, we still have drugs which target these neurotransmitters. We, as a medical profession and as a scientific community, we've moved more towards therapy, which, in my view, appreciates the complexity of human mental health just through conversation and using our kind of implicit understanding of other human beings. Yeah. Now what I'm hearing
there's one thing I want to say on therapy though.
Can I just say? Now what I'm hearing is you're saying that, we've gone from this basic oversimplified science. I'm saying that we've gone to therapy, which is appreciates the complexity of mental health through conversation, through interpersonal skills. What I'm hearing now is that there's now a place for science and the scientific method to take a more of a front and center place again, but this time it's because we actually have the tools to understand the complexity using the scientific method.
I'll be more humble and say we can begin to understand.
We can begin to understand.
Finally.
Would you agree with that kind of summary?
I understand. There's one thing I'm going to say about therapy. And I'm very... therapy should be a good thing. Everyone should have access to free, high quality therapy. Therapists are really important, but it is also like we are in a mental health crisis. Our generation has the worst mental health that we've ever recorded. And we also are the generation who's had the most mental health looked after out of any before us. And so the therapy and all this mental health and awareness stuff, it's important to be aware, is not seeming to work very well so far.
That's not necessary. That's correlation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
It's correlation,
but
explain
why yourself.
Wait, hold on. But these are not independent variables at all.
No,
they're directly connected
variables.
Getting
worse, but you know what I mean?
The more...
Yeah, but we're getting worse. We're getting worse.
We're getting worse, but
we're not getting better.
But that's because everything's getting worse. Okay, I'll give you an example.
How do you know
we're treating
hypertension
with more like antihypertensive medications, right?
Yeah.
Say furosemide. It's not a first line, but furosemide is used to treat hypertension.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, because I respect your points, I'm sure this is a misunderstanding, but what it sounds like to me is you're saying rates of hypertension is raised, rates of furosemide medication have raised, furosemide isn't working.
Ooh, you tell him. You tell him.
That to me that
no, but yeah. That's the impression I got. But
okay, wait, hold on.
If you think of it this way, so the treatment for mental health has significantly improved, and
how do you know?
You said, the amount of research that's gone onto it, the amount of
just because research has gone into string theory and still we don't. There's no single Nobel Prize in string theory.
Research that's been backed up with evidence that these treatments do work.
What evidence?
I can't, hey, this paper by this guy or that. I can't give you a specific
Tension
paper.
is rising again.
No, I'm asking you because this is.
I don't know any specific.
This is an
papers,
implicit assumption because people really want therapy to be really good.
Okay, but
I think therapy is good. I'm not even saying.
Has said it works. Okay, that's the point I'm trying to make. Peer review research. Well, yeah. I mean, if it hasn't, then kind of all been lied to by multiple researchers. That's my perspective.
All I'm saying is, first of all, I don't think it works as well as a lot of people want it to work.
What drives this opinion? Because my opinion that it does work is based on the research and on people's testimony.
Yeah, but it's not because you can't quote any of it.
Well, I can't. I mean, I can apply to anything. Why does paracetamol work? I can't quote the studies that suggest it works, but I know it works. Yeah, because those studies exist.
Okay.
It's the same kind of mentality with this. I do know those studies exist.
Yeah, but I don't think they do as much as you think they do. Even the paracetamol studies do exist.
Do you know?
But let me finish.
Spicy again.
Let me finish.
I see your point. Okay, but that's what drives my point.
Let me finish. Let me finish.
Yeah, why do you think that?
So I think a lot of therapies. First of all, I said at the start, I do like therapy. I think people should get therapy, and I do think therapy does work for some cases, but it doesn't work as well as people think. That was my thing. I literally said this at the very start.
Yeah.
I said I don't think it works as much as people want it to work, or as well, because I think it's the mental health crisis. It's really a crisis of hopelessness, and this therapy is gives people hope, which is good.
But what drives this opinion? I don't understand. Treated. So what makes you think this?
Well, because we're going worse, and first of all,
it's like Ethan said, you can't use that correlation as causation.
Yeah, but second point I was going to say, the studies are not that convincing. They're convincing for cognitive behavioral therapy, especially. They're really good for sleep. They're very known to work for sleep very well.
What, sleep therapy or?
No, cognitive behavioral therapy specifically for sleep.
Sleep?
Yeah, it's like a special subtype for it, specifically for sleep. It's actually the highest. It works really well, like the most successful cognitive behavioral therapy. It works for often for things.
Drink milk. I don't know what it needs.
But it's really unpredictable with depression. I mean, we can talk about antidepressants, like even how well do.
I do remember one research paper, and it suggested that
from what journal?
I don't remember the journal, but it said.
Come on, Musa.
I know. I am being a dick. This
guy.
Come on.
Okay, it suggested CBT when it comes to depression can be just as effective as medications.
Yeah, but medications are often
Musa's argument might then be medications on this.
No, not really that effective compared to placebos. So it's literally like this maybe, and it's even that. In studies, there's plenty of studies that show they're actually not even better than placebo treatments. A lot of medication.
I haven't seen any, but
how much of it is actually?
What journal?
American Journal of Neuroscience. Yeah.
Damn. You gotta stop. Hey, case closed. It's over.
Backing our way, man.
I'm back up.
We lost the war.
You win this one. You win this one. Hey, let's do another podcast.
It might be called something slightly different than that, but it's something like that.
Okay, so just for the next segue.
Wait, we're doing a finish this point.
Okay, fine. Finish what's your
my final
statement?
Point is. Yeah. And I knew this is like triggers everyone. Look at you two.
Oh yeah, I'm happy.
It's just I just said I like therapy. I think people should go. I literally started with this preamble. I don't think it works as well as people want it to work, and it's too unpredictable. What
was your second point for that? Sorry.
My point with
the first one is that correlation causation thing.
And there's like the papers, the evidence. There's like no, because like you can do studies with people with depression, like mass studies have been done. And it doesn't seem to be like there's no like rhyme or reason.
Yeah, the rates of treatment-resistant depression, it is very.
But there's no rhyme or reason. It's like it works very well for some people, and then it doesn't work at all for other people, and there's no There's nothing you can put your hand down onto it. And like, what type of...
That's mental health in general, though.
No, exactly. So we move back to this very like pre-scientific era. It is just wishy-washy. Mental health is just wishy.
So okay, what you're saying is you think that it's a case where
so I think
you
this
can
is
get a definitive
no.
treatment.
This is the problem. Because people already believe inherently it can. They don't think this is evidence for the treatments not being that good, or there being a better treatment that we don't have right now. Because they think that mental health is just this wishy-washy thing that always will be random and will always never give straight results, because we are these magical creatures with infinite thoughts and abstract emotions. But I don't think it's true at all. And the data shows that it's correct for most.
Okay. So you've kind of convinced me. You to an extent, you convinced me that.
Especially because I think therapy is important. For many reasons.
But you think that the treatment of mental health has the potential to be improved, and that's partly by
massively.
But yeah. And you think a promising avenue is to use a method which uses the scientific method more.
I mean, of course.
And tries to understand the complexity of the brain using the scientific method.
If I was to dumb down my problem
would that be accurate for me to say?
The most accurate way of saying
is what you're saying.
I think mental health can be treated in the way we treat any other non-psychological.
I don't know.
Wait, hold on.
Completely
it can be treated in any other way. We just have to get better at it. Oh yeah, that's it.
I'm tempted to agree. I think
I don't think I've seen anything to suggest that that's possible. Maybe it is. But there's nothing.
You talk about.
But when you say something like that, the likelihood of someone actually figure it, you actually make it more unlikely that people will have faith in something like that coming in.
Oh, that's my personal opinion. I don't know.
And for me personally,
in medical school,
actually, carry on.
We learn about certain lobes of the brain doing certain things.
Yeah.
We learn about Wernicke's area doing understanding speech and things like that. And largely that's, we know a lobe does a certain thing because when someone gets it taken out, suddenly they can't do that certain thing. So they're like, oh, it kind of does that. But it's massively kind of oversimplified. And in reality, it's much more complex. I mean, there's the classic thing that a neurologist can talk forever about what someone's condition might be and never come to a conclusion. What I'm trying to get at here is that although we have some idea of this lobe does this lobe does that, fundamentally, I don't think we understand the brain very well.
Oh, yeah, I know, 100%.
Yeah. And
there's still so much. Even the LSD thing.
I think what Musa is saying is that instead of turning away from, the methods we've used to understand the rest of the body, we should be thinking more abstractly of how can we understand incredibly complex systems.
Yeah.
Instead of turning away and thinking, okay, this doesn't work, we can't approach it like everything else. Let's just dial it up.
Here's the thing. I completely agree with that. I don't think that
when it comes to
that.
infection,
it's just I view it as almost like, because if you look at the example of schizophrenia, till this day we don't understand. We have theories.
I can tell you a lot about schizophrenia.
We have theories on how it works, but there's no definitive explanation behind what the root causes or why it happens. Even with depression, even some of the simplest depression, we don't have any definitive, concrete proof as to where it comes from and why some people are more susceptible than others.
We got some ideas.
We have ideas. But this is why I feel like with the brain, with just how complex it is and just how little we know, the idea that we can get a definitive treatment for mental health seems like sci-fi. But here's the thing I'll also add to that as well. A lot of the treatments we have now, 100 years ago, we viewed as sci-fi. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying at this current stage, with what we know about mental health and the brain, it just seems very hard to believe that that's possible. I'm not saying it's not. And not to discourage anyone from going down that path.
I mean, just from first principles, it should be possible.
Yeah, well,
unless you believe
that was like a physics thing.
Yeah, I guess from first principles, it's possible.
Yeah. So
okay. So let's bring.
So you agree with me now, which is good.
Okay, I'm not going to agree with you just on principle.
Don't get big for your booze. Don't get big for your booze. But let's.
I am being cheeky. I'm not.
We're all on the same page.
Let's bring it back.
I was right.
Let's bring
Now you're wrong. This is the voice of reason.
Let's bring it back to how we started this podcast.
Yes.
Talking about psychedelics. Then we kind of talked about the journey that of approaches into mental health, from quite simple single neurotransmitter ideas into therapy, into what the future of mental health support can look like. And we kind of summarized by thinking a little bit about how, although we think that the way of treating mental health has improved, there's still a long way it can go.
Yes.
And Musa was very much pushing, and I don't know about you, but kind of convinced me that leaning more into the scientific method and trying to understand the complexity behind mental health and treating it more similarly to how we understand the rest of the human body, that could be really effective in taking our next step forward in our attitudes to treat mental health. So I'd really like to bring it back to the start now and start talking a little bit about psychedelics. And I want to do that by asking you the question, do you see psychedelics as having a place in our understanding and or our treatment of mental health in the future?
It's a pretty good host.
Yeah.
Pretty good co-host.
We should,
you want to take my job? Again. Anyway, what's your answer to that?
I was going to say, well, the thing is, well, first of all, some people that still think psychedelics are crazy drugs for crazy druggies, essentially.
I'll be honest, I'm kind of more leaning towards that, just because, again, that lack of knowledge.
I would say, well, I'll say a few things. First of all, they're non-toxic, so non-neurotoxic. There's been several experiments on this. There was a really, I guess it's kind of a dark experiment, but I think it's kind of funny as well. They tried to give an elephant lots of LSD, and they kept on upping the dose to see how much LSD you can give the elephant to kill it.
Being fatal.
Before it being fatal. And they keep on upping the dose to insane amounts. I don't remember how much it is. I'm sure you can find it online. And the elephant died eventually, but it died because of the dose of tranquilizers they had to have on it to stop it from going crazy on LSD.
Yeah.
So we never found out what was the
Important
lethal dose.
information. Very sad story.
Very sad
that's
story.
very
Very sad story.
Especially because I love elephants, especially an elephant. If it was like
I've never really thought about elephants, but I can see why you love them.
I do. Okay.
Like Dumbo.
Yeah.
It's the only famous elephant I already know.
Okay.
Yo.
I thought you're making a fat joke,
back.
but anyways.
Okay, so psychedelics, non-toxic.
Very
What else?
non-toxic. I mean, they're drugs, but they're not only they're not non-habit forming. I think that's people said about marijuana, but I don't really know how that works. But they're often used to treat addiction, not to actually.
I've seen like stuff on that.
They are some people who might have been addicted to it, but it's not. We don't have an epidemic of people addicted to psychedelics.
Yeah.
And they actually, again, they used to treat addiction. They used to do the opposite. So just these two is pretty big. Now there's the behavioral stuff. Like if you're on site, you're going to jump off the window. Now the vast majority of people don't. I mean, I'm pretty sure there are no reported cases of people actually jumping off the window. There's people who are doing dangerous things on them. Yes, but I feel like the first two aspects already, we can talk about the behavioral stuff because there are some dangers there that we can go into. And there's also the schizophrenia aspect of it, like having mental illness from it. But the first two things, the addiction, the toxicity, which is a common thing associated with like other drugs of abuse, are probably, the toxicity definitely not, unless you're allergic to them or something, but I don't think there's been any cases on that. And the addiction aspect of it, it's, I mean, if you're worried about people getting addicted to psychedelics, you should be more worried about people being addicted to cigarettes and alcohol. It's almost non-existent. The rates of addiction are incredibly low to psychedelics. We can talk about the other two. So that's for people who hate. So people who love psychedelics, some people will be like, they're like the next thing. We all need psychedelics. They're like the future. And now I'm like, I'm not in that boat either. I think psychedelics are a useful tool. Like, paracetamol is a very useful tool, but we all know also you don't want to take too much paracetamol, but very context dependent.
There's that thing as well. Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong thing. You told me this about heroin, how in Vietnam War, some of the soldiers used to take heroin.
It was morphine.
Or morphine.
I know.
But then when they
maybe
came
heroin.
back,
Yeah,
I'm not sure which
none
one
of
it
them
was.
were addicted. Yeah.
Yeah, but when they came back, they weren't addicted because it helped them in the context and it brought them back to like a stable.
Yeah, but that's
reality.
something different because people will actually get addicted to heroin or morphine.
Yeah,
Not in the same way. People don't get addicted to psychedelics, even if they are in a bad context. That's the important aspect.
It was similar
It's not like that.
Addiction.
It's nothing like that. It's like a chemical thing. Like people, it's like chemically very. Your body doesn't crave more psychedelics and stuff like that.
But when you say it's more of maybe mental addiction, what craving that going back to that sense of
No,
happiness,
because taking
joy.
psychedelics is often, as people describe it, actively not a pleasant experience always, definitely.
Okay.
Very variable.
Very variable. And if you're in a bad mental state, it's likely to be a more unpleasant experience. Yeah. And it's a very mentally taxing experience as well.
So, sorry.
So how, and I'm sorry if you were about to go into this.
Yeah.
How does that fit into our approach to understanding and treating mental health going forward? Clearly, this seems like a good tool, but how does it fit into the future of scientific understanding?
Yeah, we can do it. So there's one thing I want to do. Again, with LSD, with paracetamol, we understand it, very useful drug, used all over the world. Has its drawbacks, but if you use it responsibly, know how to use it, it's fine. Same thing. I think the same mentality should be applied to psychedelics. The same mentality should be applied to all drugs.
Why is it
really?
Not? That's my question.
Well, there's not, because there's a huge stigma build up. It's an illegal drug. It's used for people doing crazy things and stuff.
You say the same with like morphine. Morphine has that stigma. That's
yeah, but it's used in hospitals every day, all the time.
That's exactly my point. Why isn't LSD also used in like a controlled, like Adderall? Adderall is known as like a street drug, but also
it's also used in a controlled.
Exactly. So
thing.
why isn't that? Why is it still criminalized? Why is there still this big?
Well, I've already mentioned it. The reason we criminalize, it was because of the anti-war movement. Mm-hmm. They criminalized it. I mean, they're trying to criminalize weed has been legalized now, but we know weed was criminalized
and looked down upon.
There's a few different reasons why it was criminalized, but if it was mostly associated with certain ethnic groups.
Yeah, there's also socio reasoning behind it.
There's also like stuff to do with tobacco companies trying to have a monopoly and stuff. So there was a lot of like politics around it. So that's why. Reasons, so that's sort of where it came with psychedelics as well. There's religious reasons as well. But anyways, my main point is this: like, people shouldn't attach an emotion or a morality to a molecule. Mm-hmm. Drugs are amoral. They're not good and bad.
Yeah, it's like good more.
What good and bad is the relationship people have with the drug.
It's the context.
It's the context that can be good or bad. So when it comes to people helping with psychedelics, so again, I mentioned the study at first, the one from John Hopkins, how we help these people come to terms with their fear of death and stuff like that. And why that might be, again, we don't really know why 100%. But we can look at the work done at Imperial College London, the Centre of Psychedelic Research. So I remember who was the head of the research group. So it's Kevin Hart. I think I might have forgotten his
that's actor.
No, that's Kevin Hart. Yeah, it's really different. It's Callan Hart. It's very similar.
Okay,
it's very
Kevin Hart. He's got a portfolio career.
Yeah, Callan Hart. As in Callan Hart. And the Hart is not spelled like heart. It's spelled like slightly different, but it's pronounced the same.
H-A-R-T. That's the same as Kevin Hart.
Oh, really? Oh, I don't know then. But it's very similar because I've said that before as well. I've called him Kevin Hart by accident.
Oh.
Anyways, and then they're working on psychedelics, and how they describe it is, like, for example, if you think about your patterns of behavior, as you get older, you can think about your behavior as when you're a kid. It's sort of like a mountain with like snow on it. And then you can think about you yourself. Whenever you do something, you're going with a sledge down the mountain like this, and you keep on going up the mountain and going down the sledge. The older you get, you keep on doing it for more and more times. And as you do this, whenever you go down the mountain once, the sledge makes grooves on the snowy mountain.
I think like Destiny Path or something like that.
Well, listen to the whole thing. You keep on going down. You keep down the stage.
A bit nicer.
Whenever you go down,
that bullies me.
You make grooves on the mountain, and the more you do this, the grooves in some areas of the mountain will get deeper and deeper to the point that they'll be so deep that whenever you try to go down the mountain, you will always go down the same path because of the grooves. What psychedelics seem to do for people is that it's like it snowed again, and all the grooves got sort of like filled up. And what that that's why they first of all used for, what do you call it? Addiction treatment, because it lets you step outside of your thing.
Make new grooves.
Now, if you go back to the prefrontal cortex, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is the director of the brain that decides that this is all the stimulus comes out and this is what your behavior should be when what you should do with the stimulus. And your prefrontal cortex has been activating. Okay, every day you wake up, you're gonna have one cigarette. That's just like whenever you get the stimulus, it's morning time, you're gonna have one cigarette, and you try resisting it. But it's that, and we know how the brain works. The more you do something, the neural connections get triggered out. But the prefrontal cortex is now asleep.
So that neuroplasticity isn't really.
So it's actually no. So it allows for neuroplasticity. It allows for the changing. So neuroplasticity is like the change. So it allows for neurogenesis. It allows for new connections, famously. So it allows you to, without the grooves are gone of the mountain, so you can go anywhere direction. It allows you to step outside and think about things and view things the way you've not seen them before. So that's why it helps people cure addiction. There's all these ibogaine clinics in like Canada, I think, and in Mexico people go. Ibogaine is another psychedelic to go and help them treat with addiction, and they've been really successful for treatment. That addiction is something really, really hard to treat. And a lot of people have been successful with this treatment after one session, if not 3 sessions. There is no other drug or no other therapy that works with that level of efficacy.
So why isn't it widespread?
And literally because they're still, I mean, it is becoming really widespread.
Okay.
I mean, it's on the way. I mean, we have Compass Pathways, which is like a huge psychedelic company here in the UK now. It was like designing new psychedelic drugs and doing a lot of work with this stuff. So it is becoming really widespread. It's, I think, now decriminalized in Oregon in the US. It's becoming big in Canada. So it is making its way, but there's a lot of study to be happening. So that's essentially how it seems to work and why it helps people. If you are about to die and you have been ill for a long time and you are sort of really sunken into that thing, this is again a little bit, it's a bit of an assumption, but I can see how you could be like, you could step outside and be like, okay, it can help you accept this is what's going to happen. So like reframe things and be like, this is what my life could have been, I don't know, could have been worse, whatever, and sort of help people accept with it.
Cognitive reframing.
Yeah, cognitive reframing. Now, it also helps that when this is happening, you're going to this phase because it's activating the serotonin receptors, which are associated with pleasure. You are usually in a more pleasurable, good mood while you're on these drugs, essentially. So if you're already in a good mood and then I make it so you have more neuroplasticity, so you're more likely to reset, I am biasing you to have a more positive, to then recalibrate in a more positive state of mind after you're done.
It's the opposite of a concept that I learned at med school called learned adversity. So learned adversity, I kind of see it very clearly in a close friend that I have, who's had a very rough time, very rough childhood and rough time since. And he's experienced so much adversity, so like bad things happening in his life, that he expects it to happen. It almost like, to my ears, as someone who hasn't experienced so much adversity, it almost sounds like astrology. Like he's saying, like, a bad thing hasn't happened yet. Like a bad thing hasn't happened for a while, and he's in a bad mood because he knows something is coming. Because all his life, he's learned to expect this adversity.
Yeah.
And he's running in those grooves where it's like, even when things are going good,
he's so used to it.
He's so used to it that he expects it. And then because he expects it,
it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, because you expect it and you're only looking out for it.
So any little bad thing that happens, you view it as
you see it that way, and unsurprisingly, he's very depressed.
Yeah, because very depressing.
Because everything, he expects things to go wrong, and then inevitably, just by living life, something will go wrong.
Yeah,
and then he's like, I knew it. I knew it. Something was going to go wrong.
So he's like a thing. Is it confirmation bias or something else?
Yeah, confirmation bias.
So he's been going down this snowy mountain all his life, going through these
Same groove.
awful life events.
Yeah.
The thing is, the more you do it, the deeper the grooves get.
Exactly.
Same with neuroplasticity. The more you activate those neurons, the
but
stronger
But what I'm
pathways
hearing
get.
is psychedelics could help. There's a fresh coat of snow, and this time he may be less inclined to expect something to go bad, and he might be more open to the idea that when something good comes along, that's not just a little dip. That could just be a good thing.
Yeah.
That's not tricking him. That could just be a good thing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. But it's also like
That's big potential.
Keep that in mind. I mean, to us that might sound kind of irrational, wouldn't it? Okay, you shouldn't just inherently expect something bad to happen.
But that's the whole idea.
Hold
with
on.
mental health.
Yeah, I don't think it's rational.
It sounds very irrational, but it is that he's so used to it.
Exactly.
That even
Because of those pathways.
but as soon as you close it, he can step outside and he can think with us because he's got the same rational mind. He can actually finally start rationalizing.
Yes.
Like it's not just like he suddenly stops doing it. It's like he can actually think like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Rationally, that doesn't make sense. Like
You
it's
almost
in a way
use an adult brain. You know,
exactly. You're like finally actually be able to rationalize, like think like how you would think about it.
Like I can see clearly like how the potential there is very, very big.
Now, I do want to add one for the people who love psychedelics. I was trying to address people who hate them, love psychedelics. Now, this is when it comes to, you can see the John Hopkins study. The studies they are doing with all these ibogaine clinics, the compass pathways are doing studies. This has been done everywhere in the UK. All these are done in doctored, monitored, controlled clinical settings where they keep in close contact. Everything is like they've like pre-screened you and stuff. They looked at your previous experience with things like schizophrenia, psychosis, things like that. And it's all in like a very controlled environment in a room. That's very different from doing psychedelics at a party, in a rave, and stuff like that.
You don't know your mental health.
My impression, that's where a lot of people get introduced to.
And that's also very different from that. And that's where you have this incredible, powerful, neurogenesis and open plasticity going on in your brain. And you're in the middle of a rave, and someone's trying to, and you've just.
Can you clarify for the audience neurogenesis and plasticity?
Neurogenesis is Genesis means birth or the start of something.
What does neuro mean?
Neuro means neuron, as in brain cells. So it's the making of new brain cells, and stuff like that. More making of new brain cells, but specifically. When it comes to more neuroplasticity, it's more new connections and new.
Yeah, neuroplasticity is just the malleability of the brain to shift different pathways.
Plastics named so because they're malleable. That they can be made into any shape.
But is this like solid? I'm not entirely sure. Is this solid science or just
no? This is solid, 100% science. This is not a theory. This is 100% science. You can observe it. And
what journal?
I don't know.
There's
a few journals
in this room, man.
I'm joking. So okay. So I see. So what were you saying? What was your example about taking these psychedelics in these situations? What was that?
Yeah. Well, if you're having this big, like emotional neuroplasticity moment,
it's big, like external realization,
and you are
reflection.
Maybe mixing it with other substances, and you are in like a dark rave, and you're worried about the police catching you with this on, and other factors are going on, and you maybe were in the best mental health or something, and something else is going on. This is where you can start making connections. Or you're losing sense of reality because, again, you're in a very psychologically vulnerable position. You can start believing things that shouldn't have believed and stuff like that. Because again, all those, your decision-making system is turned off. It can lead you making really bad decisions.
Yeah, that's making new tracks in the snow that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Bad tracks.
And
if you don't have someone to guide you.
And going through some bushes, like the grooves weren't serving you well before. But that doesn't mean that a new groove is always good.
Exactly. You might be creating
and this is why all these therapies are done with a therapist that helps you talk through it.
And it's in a
control, helps you find a better path down that mountain.
Same with like drugs, and I think it was in Portugal where they've legalized it in a control setting and not mixed in with other stuff.
But overall, even people who do these, like you can look at the stats by the UK government, UK policing stuff. It's still very rare for anyone to do. Okay. No, to do anything like, or America, where it's actually more specifically on the psychedelics.
Yeah.
To having any very few cases where actually psychedelics have been involved with some illegal activity or dangerous things happening.
Hear about much. Yeah.
What there's this whole history of journalism blaming psychedelics for crazy things because it makes for very good sensational stories. Where
Charles Manson-esque.
Well, that was more the government. I'm talking about.
No, but I'm saying, I mean, that was sensationalized by the media.
Yeah. But it's like, there was like loads of journalism happening. People, doing incredible, crazy things on stuff that they were never on, or they were also on 14 other substances at the same time. Yeah. It was like, so there's a whole history about, and because everyone hated it, had a negative idea of it. It was also worked for a scapegoat for a lot of people to say I was on this. That's why I did that.
I still think it's a very prominent view that psychedelics are, people, I think a lot of people still have that viewpoint. Do you think that's going to change?
What viewpoint?
The viewpoint that it's just a recreational drug and it's not good. It's just another drug.
I think a lot of people had that viewpoint, but what you're seeing right now, for example, in America, is that a lot of veterans with PTSD are being treated with MDMA with their PTSD.
I do think it's changing, but I think that viewpoint is still very popular.
When you start seeing veterans, of people who care about veterans in America tend to be more conservative minded, and when they're seeing stuff like that, the same thing's happening with cannabis. You see like people with like bone issues and stuff being treated with CBD, or even like full on people with THC, actual psychoactive THC. No, it's not treating their schizophrenia. It's treating their like seizures and stuff, epileptic seizures and stuff.
Epilepsy and all
so when your conservative grandma is being treated with THC, is like people's perspective such a, but you look at human history, there's plenty of things we thought were crazy in the past that we think is normal. Now, so I think it is changing, and it will change because people care more about being healthy than.
It is, but then you have to consider like the ethics as well of like treating someone with a drug that we still don't fully understand how it works. But then again,
that's true for any drug ever created.
I feel like with a lot of the drugs we use at the moment, we have a strong idea of how it works, like pharmacology behind it.
That's what we're doing research.
We were talking earlier in this episode about how, we don't really know how therapy works. We have ideas. We don't really know how it works. And so we almost have a lower threshold for mental health. Because we just have this as our available
the idea of like switching.
Yeah. So the question is, if we're treating people with these drugs, which work a bit,
work quite a bit actually.
No. If we're treating people with like SSRIs, things like that, which work a bit. If we're treating people with therapy, which works, but not massively. I think we've kind of established that it's not a great treatment.
When you say no massively, again, if it's like you got like sleep problems and you're doing that works really well.
Generally, we don't have. I think compared to say hypertension, high blood pressure, it's not the same efficacy of treatment that we have when it comes to mental health. I think we can agree that here. So. What I'm saying here is that there's almost, in my eyes, a discrepancy because we're using what tools we have available for us, even though they're not especially effective. We have our SSRIs, which for people who don't know, that's the mainstay of treatment for anxiety and depression and PTSD. We have therapy, and these work, but they don't work massively. There's enough research, by the sounds of it, I haven't done the research myself, but from what you're saying, there's enough research to support the use of psychedelics, and yet we're not using it.
Yeah, okay.
It's a big question. Why is that, Musa? Isn't there a link between the usage of psychedelics and like an increased risk of developing schizophrenia?
Not scientifically. There's a link between if you are already predisposed to develop schizophrenia. You might be more likely to develop.
It's a question of when are you going to get it rather than if you'll get it. Or something like that.
Well, I don't even know about that even. I wouldn't even give him. But there's no evidence in controlled clinical settings if you're using psychedelics to treat.
I think the bottom line is, I don't think there's a big potential, but we'll see more research.
Well, I think my impression is that compared to the other treatments that we have, it seems like it should have been used, and I'm sure it's much more complex in this. I'm sure this is an oversimplification, but it seems like societal stigma is the main thing that's holding it back.
I really don't. Yeah, but I agree that it's societal stigma, all that, but it really is just like, it just takes time to bring new solutions to market.
Right.
Like, it's really just how long. This study was in early the 2010s. Actually, we're moving really fast. I would say the opposite.
Okay. And as a host, I have to remain unbiased.
So I
do think the potential there is crazy.
And we obviously, I wouldn't bring it to market yet but there's plenty of companies like working really hard with like therapists and like the chemists to figure out, okay, what are the best drugs, best conditions, best forms of therapy that this goes well with, they're all like working right now as we speak. They're working on it. So it's being developed. And so I think it's actually working. It's going really fast. I'm surprised how fast it is going.
I guess I want to backtrack a little bit on what I said earlier. I was kind of confusing. I was confusing the efficacy with the amount of research behind something. And it does sound like there's a, I was conflating the two. Basically, I was saying that there's not especially high efficacy for other treatments, and there's not especially high amount of research for psychedelics.
Yeah, it's like,
but it's a different problem. It's a
different problem. But it's like at the moment, the current state, I guess, of mental health treatment is a lose-lose situation. But there's a lot of room for research, which is, I think, the biggest.
Yeah.
But
and I actually think the reason
it's exponential research.
The reason earlier I was pushing for we can figure mental health out with science, because it is a really deep down a problem of hopelessness, and that gives me hope. That, if I can treat that, means that we can find a solution. If it's wishy-washy, then you can't be like, oh, by the way, we have a treatment, but it's wishy-washy. Yeah. So you know what I mean? We don't really, you might, also, but you might not really, you know what I mean?
Also,
if it's scientific, I can be like, we will find a cure. It's just a matter of time.
If we're having a massive mental health kind of problem in our society, I mean, I'm not the health secretary, but I'm tempted to say, let's continue with the wishy-washy stuff, but let's also do a lot of research. Let's do research into this stuff. They're not mutually exclusive approaches.
Of course. Well, not that I ever said they were.
I know that.
Yeah, I just want to, for this guy.
This guy's always on the offense. Always on the offense.
I got to cover my bases.
Do you ever study for that?
Study for what?
I'm joking.
Yo.
That concludes.
No, that section. I've got other things to talk about.
So to summarize, I'd like to say before I do that there's a lot of stuff that Musa is very passionate about, and there's a lot of stuff that Musa wanted to talk about. Deliriance, Catholic Church, psychedelics in Europe, and we wanna hold on to that passion. We
do. We didn't get through it because the hosts talked about what they wanted to talk about.
Yeah. It's two against one with the mates.
2v1, man. It's 2v1.
And so we're gonna, in another episode, we're gonna cover that
in the sequel, part 2.
But for the time being, I'm very happy with what we talked about.
I'm very happy.
We started off and we talked about a general overview of psychedelics with the classes. We talked a little bit about the history,
a little about the pharmacology and the neuroscience.
A little bit about the pharmacology. Then we talked about, we did a bit of a section on kind of approaches to treating mental health. And we talked about kind of old treatments in terms of simple neurotransmitter theories. We talked about therapy, and then we talked about a potential way forwards using kind of leaning more into the scientific method. Then brought that round and talked about how psychedelics might have a place in that going forwards, and a really quite an exciting new treatment that could have a place in the future of treatment of mental health. Is there anything you think I've missed there?
Just the fact that he was incorrect in a lot of what he said, and he was saying bogus. I'm joking.
Yeah.
No, that's pretty much everything.
That's pretty much everything. Yeah. But as I said, we've got a lot of passion to extract from Musa.
There's still a lot to discuss.
We've got a lot to talk about. About deliriance and about
repeating it.
The non-mental health side of psychedelics. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I really thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Grateful.